Hello and welcome to On the Record, a debate-style television talk show where Bahamians will find the balanced, true and open debate they've been looking for. Marital rape is the most pressing gender-based issue facing the Bahamas today. Despite the prevalence of marital rape, this form of domestic violence has received relatively little attention from society over the years. Nonetheless, most people say no means no and rape is rape. Some say it doesn't matter if the predator and victim exchanged holy vows or have children together, while others say a woman does not have the right to say no to her husband. Government ministers and ministers of the gospel have opposing views. Meanwhile, this very night, some woman is entering her bedroom in fear as she knows what fate looms for her. Marital rape, is it a crime or not, is our topic tonight. And here to debate it is Donna Nichols, a volunteer at the Bahamas Crisis Center and feminist, Father James Palacios, an Anglican priest, and Pastor Mario Moxie, pastor of Bahamas Harvest Church. It's all on the record. I'm your host, Jerome Sawyer. Our discussion begins on the other side of this break.
Wait, that's Omar Little from The Wire.
You think everyone is Omar from The Wire?
Wow, it's really nice to meet a fan.
It's like he's right here.
I telling you he's being all type shows and stuff?
And you know, Rev Go Play plays a lot of good movies and TV shows.
Excuse me, can't you see we're watching something else? Rude.
Settle all your pop culture disputes with Rev Go Play. Watch, record, and stream all your favorite shows wherever you are. Free for all Rev TV subscribers. Rev, you and us together.
Are you afraid to swipe your card and you don't like to carry cash? If so, you need checks. Executive Printers can make checks for all your needs. They have laser checks, personal checks, continuous checks, and more. All checks have up to 15 security features, so you know you'll be protected. You can even customize your checks. Come and see one of our experts today, or log on to EP05.com for more info.
This issue of marital rape has been in and out of the public realm of discussion for nearly a decade now, and each time it seems the discussions become more and more divisive. We begin with a look at the most recent developments. January 17th, Attorney General Carl Bethel tells the United Nations in Switzerland that the Bahamas intends on passing legislation to make marital rape a criminal offense, labeled as aggravated spousal abuse.
The new clause provides that a complaint under this section must be made within 1 year after the cause of the complaint arose. The clause further provides that a defendant's spouse will not be prosecuted without the consent of the Attorney General. It should be noted, though, that although the proposed offense is not labeled as marital rape, it still has all of the elements of the offense of rape in marriage.
It's not the first time we've been down this road. In 2009, the Ingram administration attempted to pass similar legislation, but abandoned it under the weight of public pressure. But no sooner than it was announced this time around than a familiar chorus was struck.
What we're seeing is a government that the ministers are divided. All right? No plans for this. The Prime Minister says his personal views are not relevant to this. And then you've got two other ministers saying, yes, we want to criminalize marital rape.
Even now, the Minnis administration seems like a house divided.
Once we have the consensus, like I said, of the people, there are laws that deal with rape, whatever kind of rape. But once we have a consensus from the people that this is something, a road that they would like to take, and we have a conversation about it and how we would properly define it in our territory, and then we can move from there. But certainly, like I said, this, when it comes to the privacy and the rights of individuals, particularly those within a marriage, we want to hear what the population has to say before we go and legislate and make determination as to how we're going to manage people's lives.
Controversy aside, the legislation itself could be in trouble. Queen's Counsel Wayne Monroe warns that legal arguments can be mounted by criminalizing rape or terming it as sexual spousal abuse.
You first criminalize as rape conduct within marriage. Your proposition being that married women are the same as single women, and that marriage isn't about reproductive sex. The next step from that is civil unions and same-sex civil unions, because you've established that marriage is not about reproductive sex. And the last step that they've taken in the UK now, where they started on this road back in I think it was in the 1990s with R&R, is if I'm a transgender person, so if I was born a woman, but I'm really a man, when through medical procedures I am made to be a man, which accords with who I say I am, then my privacy right permits me to re-register as a man, and nobody needs to know that.
Our topic tonight is marital rape. Is it a crime or not? Our guests are Donna Nichols, feminist and volunteer at the Bahamas Crisis Center, also Anglican priest Reverend Father James Palacios, and Pastor Mario Moxie, pastor of Bahamas Harvest Church. Welcome to On the Record.
Thank you. Good to be here.
Glad to have you all first-timers, and that's a good thing. And whenever two men of the cloth are together in one room, it has to be a good thing. But we are really at an interesting stage in our development as a country, and it really depends on who you are. Some say we're behind in dealing with issues like this. But I first want to talk about really, and state for the record, each of your positions on the issue, whether marital rape should be criminalized or not. And Donna Nichols, I'll start with you.
Okay, I just want to start off by saying that when we're talking about rape and sex, we have to be careful that we're talking about two completely different things. So if I'm talking about marital rape, it is a crime. And we have to separate. A lot of the arguments will come about marriages and sex in marriage and so on. And rape has nothing to do with sex in a marriage. Rape is a crime. Sex is a consensual sharing of sacred energy that people allow other people to share that with them. So I just want to make sure that the audience understands that distinction, because it's very important that we separate rape from sex. If we're talking about rape, we're not talking about sex. Rape is a violent act used to exert power and control over another person, and if that's our the definition of rape, then yes, it absolutely is a crime.
Okay.
I think it's hard-pressed for anyone not to accept the fact that rape, as Ms. Nichols just said, is a very violent crime. No one condones it. Certainly you won't find this particular pastor condoning rape of any kind, whether it's in marriage or outside of marriage. So just to that extent, it should be something that is criminalized. The challenge that we have, as Ms. Nichols just clearly articulated, is defining that within the context of marriage. That's where we get all of our anxiety. How do we define that? What does it look like within the context of marriage?
I share the view too that rape is rape, within or without the sanctity of marriage. Of course, whenever there is rape, then the marriage is not holy, is not sanctified at that point. So I shared that view when the debate first started. When was it? What would have been?
2009.
2009. I made my views known then, and that is still my view.
What then and I'm glad you started by clearly defining what is sex, or the difference between sex and rape. What then constitutes a rape? And at what point does it become a rape? Because if we're in a marriage, or even a relationship, and I ask, or I make that move, what then constitutes, or what crosses the line into rape?
Okay. I will start by talking about healthy relationships, because that's really what a marriage is. A marriage is, or supposed to be, a healthy relationship. And in a healthy relationship, in a marriage, there is always consent, always. But it's not always verbal. When you're intimate with somebody, you share a space with somebody, you love and care for somebody, you develop your own little language.
So you don't necessarily have to ask.
No, it's darling, it's 6 o'clock on Friday available. It's not like that.
It's not an appointment.
No, you develop your own little language of giving consent or not giving consent. And so this is, I always like to, and this is my new word, I say disrupt the dysfunctional national narrative. We have to see things in context of healthy relationships, because that's what we want. If we want a Bahamas free of violence, we've got to have healthy relationships where people respect and honor each other. And it's the same thing. In the context of sex in a marriage, there is always, in a healthy marriage, there is always consent.
So now when does it cross that line, and when does it become something else?
Okay, when it crosses that line is when there is an issue in the marriage. And there could be legitimate things. There could be a health issue, which is a big thing that comes up all the time, either or. There's a health issue, and so you feel, well, you're denying me, and, I need it, and I want it, and so I'm going to take it. Now that has crossed the line clearly. There are times when a person may feel that they're not being honored and respected in marriage, and said then, I can't share my sacred energy with you because you're not respecting me. And so you say, what? But you belong to me, I'm taking it. Then you have crossed the line. Okay, so there are instances like that. There also could be a health reason. Sometimes one party or the other may be having affairs outside of the marriage, and it's a health reason. No, whoever you have sex with, I'm having sex with. And you say, honey, I want to be with you, and we're married and so on, but you have to use a condom. And you say, condom? Are you crazy? You belong to me. And then you say no. Those are such clear, and I'm glad you said crossing the line. Those are clear incidents of crossing the line. What we have to really begin to concentrate on now, if those things exist, if I'm saying no, if I have a headache every night, there's a deeper issue, and you need to go and get help to deal with that deeper issue, so it doesn't come to the point where that line is crossed, and now it becomes a criminal offense.
I want to come back to that issue of getting help, but Pastor Moxie, what in there that she has said that anyone should be opposed to?
Yeah, you won't find, I don't think you will find anyone that's opposed to someone by force, by threat, by fear, taking another person or forcing them to have sex. You won't find anyone that's really opposed to that. I think the gray area for most persons in society, and it's not necessarily that I share this, but I do listen to the persons in our community, simply because we have traditional norms that we must take under consideration. The gray area comes into play in terms of, is it a situation, as we talked about, an unhealthy marriage? Is it a situation that comes into play where a woman, for any reason, any particular reason, says, I no longer want to have sex in my marriage, so I'm turned off the sex. Sex is now off the table. You then are faced with a couple of options. Any man is faced with a couple of options. Either I'm going to go outside the marriage to satisfy my sexual drive, or I do some other things to satisfy that sexual drive. In our society, there is this feeling that the moment you begin to tamper with something as sacred as sex, because everyone gets into marriage for sex. I mean, let me rephrase that. Not everyone gets into marriage for sex, but sex.
It's an expectation.
It's a reasonable, definitely expectation. And then when you look at it from the Christian perspective, the Bible talks about not having premarital sex or sex outside of marriage. So Christians would want to make sure that they are only engaging in sex within that marriage. There's no doubt that there are tons of unhealthy marriages in this country, and we do need to address them. But again, just speaking to this issue, there is this overwhelming anxiety that our culture gets because it just feels as though you're tampering with something that is so sacred. So for that reason, you'll always find that people repulse or bring some level of resistance the moment you begin to talk about trying to legislate what happens in the bedroom. And that's how people deem it.
So now, how do you tell a man who is married to this woman that at the moment she says she's not interested or no, he's just supposed to accept that?
Well, put it like this. For that to be taking place, some dynamics would have had to have been in play or in trail before that.
Exactly.
It doesn't just happen. You have the situation, where the man mightn't be coming home or the woman not coming home. There's tension in the relationship. If it's supposed to be consensual, it's supposed to be life-giving, it's supposed to be an expression of your love. Well then, if sex is not expressing that, then that marriage, that is really de facto not a marriage. Okay? And with the divorce rate in this country, the 40-ish% or whatever percentage it is, they're the ones that actually go before the courts and become dissolved for one reason or the other. If that is an indicative of their level of unhappiness, statistically, take out all the emotions, statistically, 40% break down irreparably. Before that, it means that there's a whole lot of hurt, whole lot of anger, whole lot of vitriol, whole lot of dissatisfaction with where you are. And bearing that in mind, whenever a woman, all right, depending on where you start from, notwithstanding what is in scriptures and what we all agree on, in a marriage, a wife gives herself to the husband and vice versa in an equal relationship. If you start from the premise that men are equal to women and vice versa.
Well, men don't see it that way.
Well,
that's the first problem in many instances. A lot of men see themselves as superior.
Well,
Yeah,
then I don't think that's based in scripture.
No, but that's
and apart from a practical perspective, and I don't want to belabor this, but so many women making more money than men, and you say you are the superior one, but that's really not supposed to be a factor. The point I am making is, if a woman says no, then it ought to be respect.
But I have gone and married this woman. She has given herself unto me. We have been in this marriage. We have children. I'm the provider. What do you mean? No.
I can tell you this. We just mentioned it just now. From a scriptural perspective, God made man head of the family. So he's first, not necessarily in preeminence, but first in responsibility. That message...
You know we've missed that lesson, right?
Yeah,
okay.
But this is the point I'm making. That message is not resounding within our community. And I think the crisis that we have now is one of education. There is no doubt this prevailing thought that man have dominance over his wife, and so whenever he wants sex, he could demand sex. When you speak to... I've spoken to a number of women, and older women who have that same type of thought. She would say to me, there's an older woman I was speaking to, when my husband tapped me and tell me roll over, I roll over. So the idea there is, when I get married, I no longer have any say in terms of whether or not I'm going to have sex. The man has all the say. So that's the prevailing thought in our culture and our society. Now, when you understand that, and then you bring a law into play regarding marital rape, you have to understand that there's going to be a miss, there's going to be a gap. And it's the responsibility of those who are at the forefront of this, including the government, to begin an education process of what marriage should look like. It's our responsibility as clergy to teach in our churches what marriage should look like. So we have an informed society. And until that happens, you're always going to have this rub in society where people they take their traditions, their cultural traditions, things that have been instilled upon them from one generation to the next, and they swallow it.
How do you have this discussion with men who, they will say outright that I run my household, my wife is my wife, and I no law, no policeman, nobody is going to tell me when I can and cannot have sex with my wife?
Well, I personally feel that if a man has to say that, then he's very insecure. He's very insecure in himself, and he's very insecure in the marriage. If he has to put on that dominant, let's say, thing. I just want to bring in another part of this. And one of the things that we don't always remember, that our Constitution, Chapter 3, I think, Rights and Protection of Rights of People, give us the freedom. Our Constitution covers, whereas all persons in the Bahamas. So when we're talking about laws and rights, it doesn't have to do with who sounds like us, who look like us, who believe what we believe. It has to do with what encompasses everybody's rights. So you can't impose on me what you think supposed to be a marriage. I am able to make that determination for myself because the Constitution gives me that. Further to that, the Constitution does give me the right to privacy. Oh, it does. Unless I'm violating the rights of another person. Then the government, the police, to everybody has a right to intrude. So if it's a healthy relationship, the government, the police, activists, nobody needs to be near in your bedroom. Clearly, because as I said before, it's always consensual. But when there is dysfunction, when now there is rape, when now you are forcing yourself on me, you have crossed that boundary. You're now violating my right. And then the law comes in and says, and that's why we have these laws. And that's why I'm proposing we just take out those 5 little words, unless he's your spouse. It's rape across the board. Rape is rape. And that is how I look at it. We have to look at it in the totality. Yes, I believe this because that's what I am and that's what. But we have to remember that the law covers all the people in the Bahamas, and is not everybody subscribed to what we believe, but the law must be about how do we level the playing field for everybody, no matter what your belief and all of that. We have to be subscribed. I can take the Constitution to court because it protects me, and so the law has to be leveled.
We are at the point of a break in our show. I know we want to continue on this discussion. I think we're on a very, very good track. Folks, stay with us. We're going to have more on the record right after this quick break.
This segment is sponsored by Percy's Island Game.
We're gonna give you a check every week for a year. Percy's Pension Plan, Island Game.
Bro, you hear about Percy's Pension Plan?
Yeah, something about $1,000 a week for a year.
That's Percy's Pension Plan. You could win one of 5. All you gotta do is put $20 on your Island Game account, and you have a chance to win up to 52 times.
You know something, guys? I can need one of those Percy's Pension Plan, because with Island Game, it's surely a guarantee.
Oi, I ain't got no tension, I got Percy's pension.
Counting right this easy train at Percy's Island Game.
One America News Network, your leading source for the latest breaking national and international news. With nearly 4 times as many headlines as the other networks. Straight news, no speculation, no opinion, just the facts. Complete coverage 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. One America News Network, your source for credible news.
Welcome back to More on the Record. Tonight we're discussing marital rape. Is it a crime or not? My guests tonight, Donna Nichols, Father James Palacios, and Pastor Mario Moxie. We really, going into the break, began to have, I guess, a bit of a philosophical discussion now on the law versus what the church says. I know you wanted to pick up.
As far as I'm concerned, the law is consistent with what my interpretation of Scripture is, namely that even within the confines of the so-called sanctity of marriage, you can have serious violation of that. But I would like to talk about the cultural nuances and the cultural tradition. Notwithstanding what culture says, cultures evolve and people's understanding of one another changes. For example, it was only in 1962 that women got the right to vote. Now, it was
and men were opposed to that.
Right. It was a cultural norm for it to happen, for them not to have had it. Now, society evolved and our understanding of who we are as equal human beings trumped all of that. Okay? Similarly, while there are some who would say the cultural norm is male dominance, that might have been the cultural norm, might still be it. Is that correct? Can that be rooted and grounded in any kind of sound Christian doctrine? I would say no. Now, notwithstanding all that has been said, and especially when you start to talk about the man as the head of the house, some people see that as, what you call it, indefeasible right. In other words, it's a right that the man has regardless of the circumstances.
I have heard women say that,
yes,
that the Bible says that the man is the head of the household, and they are adamant about that.
No, fair enough. Now, what does that mean in practical terms? Does that mean, therefore, that all of a sudden, because you are married to this man, that man has unfettered access to your body, your mind, your spirit, your bank account, and everything else?
Some women tell you yes.
No. Some do. There are some black people who welcome slavery and thought that you shouldn't have abolition of slavery. All I'm saying, society evolves, and I see this as a part of it. And what I'm hoping from this legislation, while I know it might be hard to enforce in certain areas, the presence of this legislation might cause some men to think twice.
Pastor Moxie, is the legislation in its current form, do you agree with it, or what is the draft form?
The existing legislation that was attempted to be amended in 2009, I do not agree with that. I do not agree with the amendment, only because I don't think it's adequate. There are proponents like Ms. Nichols that would say all you need to do is remove 5 words, who's not your spouse. But then when you begin to look deeper into that particular act, into the subsections, it talks about impersonating a spouse. So then you have to remove that portion so there's no conflict. But in removing that conflict, that particular subsection, you're now faced with tampering with the entire structure of your marital rape law, and you're creating loopholes. So I think it's important that we bear all of this in mind. I'm very open to the draft that has been presented by the AG, and I think that we need to have further conversations. As we've been saying, we recognize that there are things in our society that is not whole. In order for them to become whole, we have to embark upon an incredible education program. As I said before, as Christian ministers, we have a role to play in that, based on what we teach from the pulpit. There's no doubt that most of the constituents attend our churches, so we have an excellent opportunity for education, for mindset change, and I think this is something that has to be done. But at the same time, governments want to be reelected. So whereas we have these wonderful ideals, there's the reality of whether or not a government would be willing to take the risk to do something that the culture, and we're saying this over and over again, every time there is social change, it happens because there's a grassroots movement that makes that happen. And there needs to be a grassroots movement in this regard as well. And I'm not ruling that out. I'm not saying that it cannot happen. It can happen. We have to will that to happen. We have to be determined to get our men and our women to understand what are the roles of a man and a woman in society.
Donna Nichols, I'm glad you mentioned the grassroots movement. Is there the will for this to happen? Because we can sit around this table and discuss it until the cows come home, until we blue in the face. But is there the will, particularly among women, who it is affecting the most or could affect the most?
That's a very good question. And you know, Pastor Maria talked about education. Well, what is happening is there's a lot of miseducation, and that's what's keeping these women trapped. But first of all, no, let me stop first. Let me go back. Remember, as a woman, when I was born, when women are born, we're given a script that's male dominant. And they said, follow that. That's what women do. Now, many women, they don't either from just the cultural, how they're grown. Well, we saw that in the House of Assembly yesterday. How you have grown. You follow the script, even though it is a severely dysfunctional script.
Your upbringing determines the outlook. Yeah,
exactly. So if this is the mindset, unless you're strong enough and develop a strong sense of self, not fed in by the misinformation, then you can make a good decision on whether or not this is good for me, and you can interpret it yourself. But what's happening is a lot of women, especially, are just being fed this stuff, and they believe because of who is telling them this, they must believe it. And so really, it's about the whole understanding. The people who have this voice, who are continuing to do it. You have to see the difference between gender equality and abuse in relationships. You have to understand that, because that is what is going to guide now your, and I'm not even saying reinterpretation, your clear understanding of what you're imparting to people. And this is what it is, because 90% of the people in churches are women. But what are they being fed? Well, and this is what my issue is. It has to be clear that they understand. Everybody's hedging the bet, you know. A lot of people want to come out and say, I don't believe this. I think that, you know, there should be equality in marriage. A lot of people want this. But everybody hedges the bet. They say, boy, I don't know. Everybody's afraid when they die, they're going to hell. You know what I mean? But if you concentrate on living, you wouldn't.
Well, that's a fair, you know, if I come out, what is my husband going to say? How is he going to react?
Well, I think part of the issue here also has to do with our worldview. And this is what you're speaking to. Predominantly in the Bahamas, our worldview is that of Christianity. So when you look at Christianity, you cannot go into the Bible and subtract certain scriptures.
But you do, all the time.
Yeah, but what I'm saying, though, is generally when ministers preach the gospel, and what people are hearing when they read the scripture is a wife should submit to her husband. That is the chief role of sexes within a marriage. This is the norm that is accepted within the Christian worldview. But it's not. It's not
certain areas of the Christian worldview.
I'm talking from a scriptural perspective. We cannot debate Ephesians 5 where it says wives submit to husbands. That is the scripture, so we can't debate that. The point that I'm making, though, is
what do you mean we can't debate?
We cannot debate what the scripture says. We can have an opinion that's different from it, but we can't say that the scripture didn't say that. That's the point that I'm making.
So the issue then is interpretation. We may all have different.
Does it also say submit yourselves one to the other?
It does.
Okay.
It does.
But we allow that to be trumped.
No, don't take it out of context, because anything with two heads is a freak. And God doesn't establish marriages with two heads. There can only be one head in a marriage. And this is the challenge that I think that you would have, because your worldview is different than that of the Christian worldview. In the sense of your worldview is one where both man and woman are equal in the marriage, from the perspective of, you know, as a woman, you can be the head of the home, as well as he can be the head of the home. It's optional, and that doesn't necessarily hold true scripturally, and that's the only point that I'm making. This is the tension that we have in our society. This is the tension that we're facing.
I believe my wife is equal to me in the marriage.
I believe my wife is equal to me in the marriage as well, but I don't want you to miss the point that I'm making. That doesn't change the fact that there are specific roles that the Bible has outlined for a husband and a wife.
We share a different view.
Yes, and I have to bring you back. I have to, because we're talking about all people. Our Constitution gives us all rights. It's not only those who read the Bible. And even within those who read the Bible, there can be their own interpretation of how something happens. And I really want us to challenge ourselves, to move outside of that just strong, rigid interpretation of that dogma and saying that, you know, maybe it could mean something else. Like I had said to you the other day when we talk about till death do us part. A lot of times we feel that means we're dead. I mean, God has taken us home, or, you know, but it can really mean death of the relationship. We can interpret that death, and that's why God gave us a brain. It could be a death of the relationship. It could be death, internal death. I've met many people, men and women, who are actually dead inside because there is just so much pain and hurt in a relationship. So we always have to now look, and I agree with what Jimmy said about, you know, things evolve and grow. Anything that does not evolve dies, and that's in a marriage too. A marriage has to evolve.
And that's with the topic of divorce too. If we go into scripture, scripture basically forbids divorce. New Testament. Apart from what you call the Matthean exception. Matthew says you may get divorced, but on those grounds. St. Paul is unequivocal, no divorce. And if you do get divorced, then you are to remain single. The other, Mark, says no divorce. Over the years, and I'm sure in many, if not all of our churches, but there are very few who subscribe to the notion that there's been no evolution in the thought pattern. Because if marriage was meant to last forever, there's an acknowledgement that some have died, just that you haven't had the burial. Or if you've had the burial, a person might have made a mistake in getting married. But do we serve a God who wants to keep us locked into that physically and within the bonds of marriage? Or we serve a God who will say, yes, you made a mistake there, but that's not the end of it. You may get divorced, and this is where most of the modern teaching now is. Very, very few, only a small percentage of Christians might say unequivocally no divorce. In other words, notwithstanding what Scripture is very specific and dogmatic about, I just used that as a reference, right? 80-odd, 90-odd% of Christendom would say yes, there are certain circumstances other than adultery as grounds for divorce. And we accept those people in our church as full members, as I say, the large percentage of Christians.
We have to just take a quick pause here for our break. We are at the halfway mark in our show. Tonight's topic is marital rape. Is it a crime or not? We are discussing all aspects of this topic with our guest, Crisis Center volunteer Donna Nichols, head of Bahamas Harvest Church, Pastor Mario Moxie, and Anglican priest Father James Palacios. Stay tuned. We have more on the record right after this.
The wait is over. The Music Project is here. Experience the excitement, creativity, and talent from 13 of the nation's top high school pop bands. Saturday, February 17th, 2018, 2 p.m. at the Botanical Garden. Tickets available at Airbrush Junkies, Mario's Bowling, and all participating schools. Adults 15, students 10 in advance, more at the door. Children under 5 are free. Gates open at 2 p.m. That's the Music Project. Are you ready?
It's a wealth of entertainment with a touch of class and sophistication. A journey of the senses with an unparalleled sense of style. Discover hidden adventures that are cradled in the palms of paradise. traverse the annals of human history, and explore the farthest reaches of exclusivity. It's an excursion that few can afford, but all should experience. And it's only on AWE.
And welcome back to tonight's show. We've been discussing all aspects of marital rape with our guests, Father James Palacios, Pastor Mario Moxie, and Donna Nichols. One of the concerns with this whole question of marital rape and spousal abuse is something that has plagued men for as long as I think I would hasten to say that rape has been a crime. In some instances, men have been falsely accused for whatever reason, leading to some embarrassing situations, even legal situations. There is this fear and concern that this law could now open that door even wider, because you could have instances, and there are instances when the marriage goes bad and the wife retaliates for whatever reason. Is there a safeguard from that spiteful wife coming forward and saying, my husband raped me?
Thank you for asking that question. It's a very good question, and the answer is in maybe 3 parts, but short. Number 1, false accusation for any crime
is a crime.
Is a crime. Okay, that's standard. I mean, we know this. Okay, this is for any, because there are false accusations for every single kind of crime that you do, and it is a crime. So I will clear that up, okay? The whole notion about, and you didn't say it this way, but this is one of the things that come all this time, about these vindictive women who are going to suddenly come forward and so on. In my experience, and I said this before, the change in the law, taking out those 5 little words, I'll never come off of that, is sending 2 clear messages, okay? Number 1, to the victim, that we are hearing you and we care and we believe you. And to the perpetrator, if you commit a crime, you're going to be, there is a law that you're going to be punished for. However, the idea of these droves of wicked women coming forward to accuse their husbands is false, because there are so many other structural barriers that will prevent, and it does now, and will still prevent women from coming forward. So that whole notion, which is all we put is use that as a chink in the wheel, all that is doing is saying to the perpetrators, we got your back, you don't have to worry about that. We're going to protect you. Them victim women, we're going to protect you. No, we're not going to do this law because it's not right. All our energy instead should be focused on how do we encourage people to have healthy relationships? Instead of victim blaming and thinking that this is going to happen, take our energies and say, these are the elements of a healthy relationship that we want to push, and use that energy instead of this whole thing about these women are going to come and so on.
I agree with you that our focus need to be on healthy relationships. Notwithstanding, though, there is an element, and you're right, there's an element out there that people feel as though if we create a law, and it all depends on how this law is written. That's why we have to pay very close attention to the written law, because in a court, whenever there's an accusation, judge is going to rule according to what the law says. I was encouraged to hear the Attorney General mention corroborative evidence, that it isn't going to be a situation where a man or woman can just say that, this person attempted to rape me or has raped me and make an accusation. There has to be some type of evidence to corroborate what they're saying. However, we can look just to the north of us and see where women have come out and accused men of certain actions, and without even a court of law, they've lost their entire reputation.
They have been tried in the court of public opinion.
And their jobs and their income and everything else. There's no doubt that there is a concern there. For us to say that it will not happen, that women will not falsely accuse men, is a major leap that I'm not prepared to take, to say that won't happen. There's a concern even among women about this, not just men, but there's a concern with women about this, that you can pretty much open the door And let's face it, you ask a man, to rate the healthiness of his marriage on a scale of 1 to 10, the man would probably say, oh, my marriage is about an 8. You ask the woman, his wife, and she'll say it's a 3. Men are sometimes not in touch with the realities of their relationship. And because of that, they're extremely unaware of, to the extent that any woman would go to get out of the relationship and at the same time be very vindictive. I'm not saying that that will happen in droves, but the possibility of that exists, and we have to be aware of that. So the actual legislation, the draft that the Attorney General has prepared, is one that I think needs to be scrutinized to ensure that this particular law is not abused.
Yeah. What would be some of the key recommendations, though, in changes?
Like I said, I was encouraged to hear him talk about corroborative evidence. I think there has to be.
Has always been.
There has to be corroborative evidence where it's not just her say versus his say. I think there are other things that, as I look at this, we should be aware of the fact that marital rape is not something that is reported in any great numbers around the world. Those numbers are very low, and I think there are reasons for that. When we approach this, my heart goes to the victim, this woman who's being sexually abused and taken advantage of. And to me, I think that sometimes when we begin to look at it through those lenses, why, if this woman is being abused, why isn't she reporting it? Why isn't she going to the authorities? Why isn't she doing something about this? Obviously, there are a number of reasons. The fear of retaliation and all sorts of things that this woman goes through. But also top on that list is financial support, not wanting to lose financial support. So I think,
big issue.
And the draft that I see don't address this, and I think we need to take it probably a step further and really look at how do we support, make sure that these women who are victims don't lose their financial support. There has to be something that we can look at so that this woman can continue her lifestyle in society.
You asked the question, why? Why wouldn't the women come forward? Well, the truth is, tell me if I'm wrong, is there any provision now under which a husband could be charged for this kind
I'm
of
talking
offense?
about global statistics. No. Women don't come forward globally. I wasn't referring to the Bahamas when I mentioned that.
Okay.
Marital rape laws around the world is hardly reported. So from a global perspective,
all right,
I was
global
speaking.
perspective. All right. The way I see it, the presence of this law ought to embolden women who feel as if they have been aggrieved, and for men who believe that they have this right or privilege that is irrevocable, they might want to think twice.
And I agree with you, but that's not the reality. And we have to ask ourselves, why isn't that the reality?
Well, the fact that a law could be abused should not negate the necessity to have it enacted. It is there two-pronged, preventative and, of course, curative if somebody violates it. And, of course, this is where, and I think you're big on this, Brother Moxie, and I think most of us are. People need to get proper counseling before they get married, but bearing in mind that people enter relationships for all kinds of reasons, where when they break down, people ought to seek counsel so that, because before it gets to this forced sex or rape within or without marriage, things have broken down. And that's where the church and other agencies ought to be able to intervene if people come. Unfortunately, a good number doesn't come, and therefore you have situations where people are accusing. Now, with respect to false accusation, ultimately the Attorney General determines if there is a case to be answered. All right? But in addition to that, the logistics of how that works, if a woman feels so aggrieved, for example, if you go to the police with in a certain state of mind, it just happened, here it is, certain pictures. I mean, the children have the screaming on the thing. All of these things, I believe, corroborate that you had sex, that non-consensual sex, and therefore it's rape. But I take your point about not wanting men in particular, so we're talking about men, to be accused because, as you say, your reputation,
everything, your livelihood, everything is affected. Don, I know you wanted to get in on a
But
point
just-
before we go to the break. Go ahead.
Okay, I just want to say that the women actually do come forward. They do come forward for help. How do I live with this in my marriage? Because the structural barriers that I told you about a woman taking the next step to go to the police to it, it's not there, but they come in for help. Usually, a lot of women come in first talking about they're not happy in marriages, or there's physical abuse, or some other sort of abuse, and then we will get to the fact that they are being sexually abused in their marriage. So they do come forward, and we do help lots of women, but they're not going to the law, okay? So, and that will continue to happen. The second thing that I just want to make a little note about, this whole notion about the whole financial thing. And I think we really have to be very, very, very clear about this. There are many, many, many women who are living their lives, running their homes without any support of husbands or of significant
Some of them are in the home.
Exactly. A lot of women. So when we're talking about, it's just about, and it is, there are some who, yes, because there are some women who are financially dependent on their partners, but it's not, we have to remember that there are, and when we have to remember when we make some of these statements, we have to be talking about, we have to be inclusive. We have to talk about everybody. So a woman who is running her home, so whether her husband or boyfriend or son is just a layabout and will not work, or it could be legitimate, he could be ill, he could be something, and she is running the home and making it work and so on with her children. We cannot ignore these women. And when you make those sorts of statements, these women are saying, but what about me? Don't I matter? I've been doing this for years. So we have to and part of the advocacy for me is I talk about all women, all relationships, all people. I can't separate them. Like I said, it's only those who look like me or believe what I believe or have a healthy marriage. We really have to widen the conversation to include everybody and understand. And the thing about it is, if we do not decide if we're thinking only about the fact that men will be abused and men have their reputation to think, then what we're doing is that we are saying to the women that you don't matter. It's all we're worrying about is a man's reputation and whether and you don't matter.
Not to that extent. Not to that extent. The only point here is this: that man could be innocent and not tried in a court of law, and that is the factor. It's impacting the men's society who may not even want to get married as a result of this.
We have to take our final break in the show. We are going to, of course, wrap up our discussion right after this break. You're watching On the Record.
We're gonna give you a check every week for a year. Percy's pension plan, Island Game.
Bro, you hear about Percy's pension plan?
Yeah, something about $1,000 a week for a year.
That's Percy's pension plan. You could win one of 5. All you gotta do is put $20 on your Island Game account, and you have a chance to win up to 52 times.
You know something, guys? I can need one of those Percy's pension planning because with Island Game, it's surely a guarantee.
Percy's pension plan. Dream big, we will help you live it. Percy's pension plan. Island Game, we got you. Percy's pension plan. From the friends you can trust. If winning is a must, don't play the game you know.
Oi, I ain't got no tension. I got Percy's pension.
Count and ride this easy train at Percy's Island Game.
Our final segment in this episode, we are talking tonight about marital rape. Is it a crime or not? My guests, Donna Nichols, Pastor Mario Moxie, and Father James Palacios. We are at I started out this show by saying we're at a critical point in our development in this country. Should we not have dealt with this, though, a very long time ago?
Which one of
Anyone,
we should have. There was an attempt to, but like everything else, it was met with a lot of resistance.
But should not have they pushed through and soldiered through and say, you know what, we're going to do what's necessary.
Let's face it, the FNM government at that time was unpopular enough. Okay? And of course they went to referendum shortly thereafter in another matter, and as they say, the rest is history. At a certain point for the last 3 elections, if the governing party had told people that Jesus loved them, people wouldn't have believed it. I mean, that might be a little exaggeration, but I think you take my point. But society has evolved. There's a better understanding now than it was then.
The reason I ask that is because you look at issues like marital rape, you look at you know, we would have just gone through a referendum on the citizenship issue for the 2nd time and it failed. And these things seemingly are embarrassing.
Yeah, they are.
You know, because we should be at a point in our development where these are non-issues. We should have addressed these a long time ago, and we're coming back to some fundamental discussions. And sometimes I say, you know, I think the world must think we're a bunch of barbarians.
No, but hold on. Let's be fair now. They're non-issues to who? They may be a non-issue to you, but they're not a non-issue to the people that voted.
My point is that these are things that we should have addressed through law, through discussion. We should have walked past some of these by now.
I agree, but here's the point that I made earlier. Until we're a very young nation, don't forget that. But until we get to the point where we realize that education is the key, until we embark upon an education campaign for everything that we do, we cannot expect to take something and shove it down the throats of the Bahamian people and say, okay, this is what the world would think of us, and we want to comply with the global expectations, and so I'm going to shove this down your throat. Internally, we should embark upon an incredible education campaign before we bring anything to the people, so that everyone is well informed. They can then go to the polls if we do have a referendum and vote according to the way that they were educated. There's no shortcut to this. That's all I'm saying.
A point was made earlier in the show, and I want to go back to that. Donna said that there was a lot of misinformation out there. And it's not from a lack of information, but there is a lot of, and we seem to be, in most instances, driven by fear. Whenever there is an issue that people want to derail, they throw into the fear factor. They throw in the fear factor. And I brought that up because I would like you gentlemen to really speak to, what do you think, or should the church have, church, Christian council, religious leaders, taken more of a role in this? I mean, as the point was made earlier too, you know, women especially, the largest segment of the congregation are women. Just as the government should have pushed through in 2009 and the workforce, should the church have not had more of an active role and a cohesive role? Because, as I used earlier, government sometimes looks like a house divided.
Well, let's face it though, Jerome, on the last referendum, the church community was divided. Okay?
Yeah.
It is a statistical fact that the heads of most of the denominations came out, let's say, for the gender equality bill. Some others from smaller denominations came out against it. But even within the bigger denominations, call it that, obviously the head was saying something that was different from where the rank and file membership
Are we finding ourselves now in the same position?
Yeah, we don't know. But the point I am making is that whatever you say about the last referendum, there was a lot of discussion, there was a lot of education taking place. But it got caught up with the whole issue of the gay agenda and the international community's imposition of that on us. When you throw that into it, like you said, the fear factor, and that came to the fore.
Do we see that happening again? I mean, some of the questions I threw at you today came out of things that I see, things I see people saying on social media, and some of the discussions I have with things that people are calling into radio stations and saying, and I'm thinking to myself, this makes absolutely no sense.
Yeah, but see, until we're prepared, again, I go back to an education campaign. There was no education campaign leading into the referendum.
Oh, I would definitely disagree with
No,
that.
let me complete my thought. There is an announcement of a referendum that we're having, and then the campaign starts. That's not what I'm referring to. That's when I talk about education.
Have a series of town meetings and discussions, etc. People were traveling around the country.
That's what I recall.
I remember that specifically.
Don't get me wrong. There was. My point here is this: you cannot start that process when you have a date for a referendum, because now you have an agenda. And so all the education goes towards an agenda that I'm trying to get this thing passed. Before there is a referendum, before we even set a date, we need to say, let's embark upon a 2 to 3 year education plan. No matter how you slice this, we cannot take shortcuts to transforming a nation. And that's what we intend to do. That's what we want to do. One of the things that became apparent, I think, to the masses is you do have an element of those in society that would consider themselves the elite, the intellectual of society, that feels as though this is how society should be ran, while the masses here feel like, you know, I'm not on that run with you. And the elite or the intellectual will want to force that agenda on the masses.
Let me challenge that, though, in some instances, because in many cases that I know from my experience, you will have public education campaigns that take place over extended periods of time. People spend years going to islands, but it is only when now it becomes when you do see the finish line, when the legislation has been drafted, and now all of a sudden it's a bandwagon issue. Everybody on social media had something to say about it. Meanwhile, for 1 or 2 years, you never picked up the paper to read anything. You never came to any public discussions. You never got involved. But because you heard somebody say something, or you saw something on social media, or the government pushing this and you were on their run, and so then of course you have all the political now opponents just because it is something the government is pushing and they are opposed to it. So now we're going to dismantle the whole process. And that's my concern, that we can never seem to be able to get to logical, sensible discussions because there's so many other, and then once it hits, and it's everybody on social media now, everybody has an opinion.
But this is the challenge that we face. We have to figure out a way to make that happen. I agree with you. Those things do happen. But we can't sit back and say, okay, you know, I'm frustrated because people are not getting it. We have to figure out, how do we educate our society? How do we bring our society along? And until we're prepared to address that, we're going to continually be in this contentious element.
Donna Nichols, we're just about out of time. I'm going to give you really some closing words.
The influential voices, I feel sometimes, have a different agenda. If the influential voice does not believe in gender equality, they will find a way to message that, to make the people believe that gender equality is wrong. If the influential voices believe that there are these vindictive women who are going to blame the husband, so marital rape is wrong, and so on, then that's what's going to happen. So we have to step back and say, who are we protecting, and who are we really protecting, and who are we not protecting? And if we're protecting the perpetrators, then that is wrong. If we're not giving voice to those who are being hurt, then there is nothing Christian in that at all. What would Jesus do? And so what I'm trying to say to you is that we have to just not look at this from what's here. We have to look at it in a way in which, do we believe this? If our focus is on a Bahamas free of violence, and I always say this, you know, the ruin of a nation begins in the homes of its people. So if we believe in a Bahamas free of violence, then we need peace at home. And if there's rape in a marriage, there cannot be any peace at home. It's a facade. And what's happening, Jimmy gave the thing, 40%, it's more than 40%, I'm sure, that we're living this facade. And we are enabling this facade instead of saying, this is what a health relationship looks like, and these are the ways that you can get help, and let's work towards this. And that is what we breathe, eat, walk, talk every day a Bahamas free of violence. Are you on that run or not?
Unfortunately, we're out of time, but I do want to say something that both of you gentlemen brought up earlier that I think is so very important to this discussion and so many more, that we, as a church, as a people, we have to work on relationships. We have to work on something you said too, that cultural change and getting our people to understand that violence at any level, whether it's in a marriage, whether it's out on the street, wherever, is not acceptable. And I hope that, you know, we can begin to have more reasoned discussions, but certainly, you know, the Word of God also too has to play a role. And so, you know, I thank you, I encourage you that within your ministries, within your counseling, that we begin to look now at trying to fix some of the fundamental problems so that this issue of marital rape never has to come up.
And we encourage people to get counseling before, during, and indeed after marriage. Okay, so I think we all on the same page.
Because you might get divorced and then carry that problem to some other marriage.
That's the point. That's the point. So cheer up. Let's do what is right. Protect those who are being offended, and let us teach our men proper protection of the women, and vice versa.
Well, folks, you know, we could go on for another hour, but I thank you so much for having this discussion with us. You know, it is very important for us to have these types of discussions that involve different views and opinions, so that at the end of the day, our goal always is to put our viewers and our citizenry in a position to make informed decisions. We're not always going to agree, but at least let's agree to make some informed decisions.
Fair enough.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. We hope that you have enjoyed our show tonight. Special thanks to Donna Nichols, Pastor Mario Moxie, Father James Palacios. I don't know if I've ever had two men of the cloth on the show at the same time, so this must be a good thing.
I can see the halo.
Let's hope that's what it is. Also, special thanks to my producer, technical staff, and of course you, the audience, for watching. Be sure and join us for more On the Record next week. Once again, I'm your host, Jerome Sawyer. We'll see you next time.